Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about requirement analysis phase in your SDLC. So let's see what we have in store. So requirement analysis phase basically comes after your planning is done. The requirement analysis phase is a very crucial phase in your SDLC where you understand what the users actually need from your software. It involves gathering functional and non-functional requirements for your software. It establishes a foundation on which the subsequent phases of SDLC are dependent on and they rely on. Let's see what are the steps involved in requirement analysis. Well, first you start by defining an idea. You start with a clear goal or a vision of what the software needs to do. And then you start doing brainstorming. You discuss about the idea with the stakeholders to explore what is the feasibility. How do you make sure that the software that you're creating meets their needs? Similarly, you also do a feasibility analysis in terms of its technical, economical, and operational, feasibility. Same things we do in planning phase. The only difference is now you talk a little more in depth, a little more in detail in terms of your requirements and individual items that you have. Let us see what are the most effective requirement gathering techniques that we have available. The first one is, of course, interviewing. It could be a one-on-one interview, or it could be a one-to-a group interview where you're talking to a group of people who are your stakeholders and they are going to use that software. So you understand from that perspective on what they need in your software. The other thing is you also have focus groups where you actually collect small groups of stakeholders and you discuss the needs and the expectations. And then the next thing is you facilitate workshops where you have structured sessions to collaboratively define and prioritize requirements, because now I can ask you for the world in terms of requirements, but you still need to prioritize it, right? So this is where you have certain workshops where you help the users understand what they actually need as well at times. And a quick shout out for myself. I do have a free handbook on Scrum, which is available for you to download. The link for that is in the description. I do cover a complete fitness app journey using your Scrum methodology on how you will create that fitness app, what things to consider, how you will approach it. I hope it helps you in some way or the other. Now back to the lecture. So the first one is surveys and questionnaire. You basically run a set of questions that you have predetermined over a set of audience. So you do a quantitative and a qualitative analysis of what that survey looks like. Then you have brainstorming. We already talked about a bit. Basically, you have a wide range of people who are going to use this and you talk about the idea and see what all comes out of it. There's also mind mapping where you organize and categorize your ideas visually, where you envision, oh, this is the feature that you will need and this is a higher priority, let's move it up. Something like that. So now you have a mind mapping technique that you could use for gathering your requirements as well. And all of this is wasted if you do not document your requirements. So one thing to note is it is very important to have clear and precise documentation. And when I started doing my requirement analysis, one of my leads told me, right, consider requirement analysis or requirement gathering documentation to be very close to writing a legal document. Every word in it has a lot of importance. So you also need to make sure you include project objectives, user requirements, constraints, assumptions. Everything needs to be captured in your requirement gathering. This documentation basically serves throughout the project lifecycle. This becomes your guide for doing everything in the project, because this is what ultimately the stakeholders or the users are looking for in your solution. And there are some times where you need to validate and prioritize requirements. Sometimes the users don't even know what they want. So when you do exercises like mind mapping and brainstorming, you make them realize, oh, this is the feature that is actually the most important versus something else, right? So you need to always validate requirements with your stakeholders to ensure that they meet expectations. You need to also prioritize based on importance, dependency, and the impact. So the most impacting requirements should be delivered first. For example, if you're creating a software, authentication is probably the most important. Everything else doesn't even matter if you can't even get into the application correctly. Or if it is open to everybody, then your software is not behind walls. So there are multiple constraints, right? So you need to make sure that you define your requirements in the order of priority and impact. Use validation techniques like reviews and walkthroughs where you talk about requirement and you review it with your stakeholder group. You basically educate them and learn from them what adds most value to their business. And lastly, how do you manage changing requirements? Well, you can always expect that there is a change coming around, right? So you can always expect and plan for changes in your requirements. Always keep a buffer. Always make sure that, things could change, or a feature that you're building may not be even relevant. So you need to also have iterative approach to accommodate new information and feedback. You already locked your requirements. Now, how do you handle it? This is what we talk about when we move towards Agile and Scrum, on how you can make it iterative and informative. But for SDLC, it is mostly locked requirements. And of course, if you want, you can regularly review your requirements, especially before getting that into execution. So that will save you some pain points. If there are changes, you could handle them sooner. In software, we always say, right, the cost of the change is the smallest when it's done at the earliest. Same thing applies to requirement gathering as well. All right, it's time for a recap. So we did talk about what requirement analysis is. We checked the steps that are required for your requirement analysis. How do you do effective requirement gathering? There are different techniques that we talked about. We talked about the importance of documenting your requirements nicely and correctly. And of course, you need to validate and prioritize your requirement. And lastly, how do you manage change in your requirements? Again, if you have any questions around any of these topics, let me know in the comments below. Let's see what are the common questions. The first one is, what are the challenges that you usually get during requirement gathering? At times, when your stakeholder group or your user group is not very focused, or they don't even know what you need to create in a software, because now you need to declutter their minds to make them understand what they actually need. So that is one of the biggest challenges that I have personally faced in the requirement gathering, that you need to walk your customer through on what they want, which is so difficult. And the next question is, how can you be sure that your requirements is thorough? You cannot. So there is no way that you can be thorough, but you could add steps. You could do multiple reviews. You could drive, different diverse stakeholder groups, have different sessions, different interviews. Those are some of the techniques that will help you understand your software and your solution much better, which will ultimately lead to a better requirement gathering. What tools can we use? Well, my personal favorite is Jira for entire software development, but you could also use Trello, Microsoft Project, and any other tool that is available that you like. And lastly, requirements are not just words on a page, but the foundation of building a great software. So I don't know who said this, but I really find it very relative. And I want to make sure that it's not just something that you document. You need to understand what you're delivering. And if you're looking for more in-depth videos and articles related to SDLC, Scrum, Agile, there is plethora of content on my website, teachingagile.com, where I curate all of this for you. Again, you can go and check it out, or there is a link in the description. That being said, if you're here till now, please do like and subscribe to my channel. That will really make YouTube happy. Thank you.